Hey, this is Marjory, another off grid with Marjory Wildcraft, and I want to talk to you today about more about silver and why I'm so passionate about it. So I've got to start out with a story. A couple years ago, Christmas, and I'm riding with my son on a trip across a chunk of Texas, going from I think it was like the Galveston area to Austin, and just heavy deluge of rain, just heavy, heavy, heavy. Traffic is crawled down to like a small paddle, and I am thrilled because I don't get to spend much time with my son, and so we're kind of stuck in the truck together. And this, what normally would be like a 3-hour drive was going to be a 6-hour drive or something like that. So. But as I said, I'm like really thrilled about that because he's grown up and we don't, like I said. So after the first hour or two and all the the preliminary and the kind of the superficial stuff is talked about, and then he turns to me, he says, "Mom, you know how sometimes there'll be somebody who has like a piece of green stuff between their teeth and nobody wants to say anything to them?" And I thought, oh, yeah. And he says, "Well, we got to have a conversation." And I'm like, "Okay, whatever this is going to be, let's do it." And he goes, "It's about that silver you've had." And I'm like, "Okay, well, what's the problem with the silver?" And he says, "Mom, how long have you been investing in that?" And I said, probably right about, right around when you were born, I think, right after, so now it's like 25 years. And he says, "Mom, that money, like, you still have it all?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I have it all." He goes, You know how much you have?" And I said, "Well, yeah, of course." I said, "You know how much I have." Well, actually in the divorce, he actually helped his dad, like, count it all up and divide it up and stuff. I think he have a good idea. He says, "Have you bought any more?" And I said, "Yeah, I did buy some more because I ended up with the small farmhouse in Colorado, and I knew after a while I didn't want to, as much as I love that little town, I'd love to, but I can't really, for me, I can't handle having two properties separated by 2,800 miles. It just wasn't working out. And I had to make a decision where I wanted to live. And I knew that little farmhouse, wonderful, on an acre of river bottom land with water rights that went back to the 1800s, little community surrounded by organic farms, and just a wonderful little community, beautiful little property. And I knew that property would probably hold its value, even though I knew that the real estate market was going to tank. And for a moment I kind of thought, well, maybe I should keep it as a rental income or something. But then I'm like, wait a minute, if I sell the property, take out whatever capital gains I have now and put that into like theta and silver, I know the theta and the silver are going to 100 or 1000x at some point in time, a couple of years. I'm just gonna do that, right? It makes a lot more sense than hanging on to this single house. So I did. So yeah, so Ryan, I put, definitely some of the capital gains in the house wasn't a huge amount, but honestly, you don't need a huge amount anyway. So I've been, and whenever I get an extra $100, which is less and less frequently lately, but whenever I get a little bit of money, I buy a little bit of silver, like, right? Why not? Like, it just makes so much sense. He's like, "But Mom, think about it. What has been your annual rate of return on that silver over this, 20 years or 23 years or whatever it was?" And I said, "Well, actually, I did calculate that a little while ago. I was buying a lot of it when it was, $4 an ounce. And at that time in the car, it was 20 something. And like, it's like a 7% return annually." He says, "Look, if you'd have put that in real estate, you could have done so much better." And I started laughing at him. So, bless his heart, my son only knows me as Mom, right? He only knows me as the lady who kind of bitches at him for leaving his dirty laundry on the floor in the bathroom, or the one who's taking care of the chickens in the gardens and, cooking and, taking care of the house and doing all that kind of stuff. And he knew I was running the Grow Network business, but he had no idea that was, making $1 million a year, and that what a huge organization it was. And You know, all he thought, like all anybody ever thought, was, oh, just a little gardening blog. By the way, we're not making that kind of revenue anymore. So, but it was really we had a really good run for a while there. Anyway, so he only thinks of me as mom, right? And he doesn't know that prior to his birth, actually, I had been just doing a lot of real estate investment. I mean, I was buying and selling. I've bought and sold maybe 300 houses in my life, maybe more. You know, and very, you know, we did really well. Let me just say that. I made my first million by the time I was 40. And going into growing food and going into motherhood, actually, I knew that would be a 20-year journey. And I wanted intentionally to develop the things that come when you go fully into motherhood. Now, I naively thought when I first started going into motherhood that I would be able to run the real estate business and be mom, and that really started to become abundantly apparent that was not going to be something that I could really do to the extent that I wanted to do. And I wanted to go into motherhood to develop intuition, to develop more emotion, to develop more feeling, to go more into a feminine aspect, to go more into a maternal aspect. And I did. And I realized at one point that would be, you know, a sacrifice of the whole business that I had created. And there was other things going on, and then I had some other major wake-up calls, and I'll do another video for you sometime on why it is I got into growing food if you haven't heard that story. But so, you know, Ryan's perspective, all he knows me as mom, right? Cooking dinner, washing dishes, picking up, you know, that kind of stuff. And he doesn't, you know. So I'm like, Ryan, I've sold more real estate than you probably ever will in your entire life. You know, I know the real estate game, you know, absolutely. I know how to invest in real estate. But part of the reason I got out of real estate in the early 2000s was not only because of these choices of motherhood and seeing a bunch of other things, but I also foresaw the 2008 collapse. I thought it was going to happen sooner than that. I do tend to be a little early. But I knew that was coming, and I didn't want to get hung up in that, right? So, and by the way, I know that the collapse that we're in now, I could see that coming. Actually, I thought it was going to happen 2 years ago. I pegged the peak of the market here anyway as June of 2022, but you know, most real estate markets for houses and stuff are, you know, they're just amateurs or people that do. Oh, Jose, you got some mangoes? I'm gonna get some later. I'm doing a video for my friends right now.
Some good mangoes and big mangoes right there.
Man, you had the biggest mango on there the other day. All right, I'm coming back with my ladder. Thank you. That's Jose. He's fun. So anyway, he's like, well, yeah, but 7%. I'm like, you know, Ryan, I've been in real estate. I know what real estate's all about, the ups and downs of real estate. And right now is definitely not a good time to be in real estate. But, you know, he had just done his first deal, and he'd just bought I was really proud of him. He bought like a 12-unit RV park, and he's building a whole school. He teaches powered paragliding. He's really doing well. And I don't want to rain on his parade. I mean, like, I try to show him stuff, but, you know, yeah. Uh-oh. Okay, so don't know what happened there with the screen. This phone got broken a little while ago, and I just had it repaired, and we had to wipe everything, and some setting is apparently set. Anyway, I'll patch it all together for you. It'll look seamless to you. So anyway, I'm like, no, real estate is not, you know, going to be any good. And I said, you can absolutely lose everything in real estate. You know, I'll tell you this story. A friend of mine and I were kind of comparing notes on the economy and stuff, and she's got an analyst who's saying, you know, the real estate market in the United States will drop by about 90% with what's going on here. She goes, I just can't believe that. Like a $500,000 property would be $50,000. And I said, I've lived through that, something like that. I said, you know, I used to live in Asia. I worked and lived there for about 10 years. I was based in Hong Kong. And I'd purchased 2 properties when I was there. It was the second and third property that I'd ever bought. And one of them I did okay on. You know, I managed to sell it for a little bit more than I bought it for. Now, I got to say, Hong Kong was this market that could never go down, right? It's an island. I mean, really, they get down to the square centimeter when they're measuring the lots. Like, land is so precious there. There was all of mainland China for a market for people that were coming in, and the mainland Chinese and the growing middle class of the mainland Chinese, not to mention everybody else throughout Southeast Asia. This was a market that could not go down, right? And the other property that I had there, it was a small flat, and I bought it for $220,000. Had to put $45,000 down. They were the banks there were a little more conservative. And I was leaving, and the other thing was 1997 was coming along, where there was going to be a handoff from the British to Chinese, which meant that more Chinese would be coming. Like, this market was going to explode even more than it was, right? So, like, I thought I was sitting on a gold mine. That market dropped 70%, and it seemed to me like it was the blink of an eye. My experience of it, the brunt of it, happened in about a year. I was looking at some other data recently, and it looks like it was a full, like an 18-month process, 70%. And I had to come to a closing table with $80,000. So I can tell you, real estate markets can and do fail, and there are no markets that are that always go up, you know. And in fact, actually, it's a really good thing if you're going to be an investor or you're going to be a trader or something like that. It's really, really good to have some huge losses in the very beginning, because it teaches you humility. Right? The traders or investors that have huge wins in the beginning, oh my goodness, yeah, they're setting themselves up for failure, because the market will humiliate you at some point in time. So, so anyway, you know, fast forward, and we're in Texas, and I had developed this real estate business. We hadn't sold it yet, and I hadn't had that wake-up call yet that made me decide I need to grow food and teach other people how to grow food. And I think it's about 2001 when the Twin Towers thing happened. September 11th happened, and there was a period in there for a couple of months when I believe the narrative, but in the back of my mind, things were like, no, I didn't see an airplane crash into the Pentagon, and it does not make sense. An airplane crashing, like this thing, like on the back of my mind was all this conversation, but the overwhelming whatever was going on with all their whatever programming and stuff, and then just the media being blasted at you. I believed the narrative for a few months, but then when I started to figure out, like, oh no. But it did occur to me, and I also was not clued into how the world truly worked a lot at that point in time. But it occurred to me that, you know, with a big event like that, you could really make a change in the world. You could really make a difference when an event like that happens. I mean, most of the United States we all remember where we were when George Bush made that, that little speech after 9/11, right? And I thought, wow, this really is an opportunity, and it was. They structured it that way. But in my naivety, I thought, well, I don't know why I got inspired. I thought I might try to get into politics or something and just, see if there was an opportunity there. I didn't want to go full on into it. And it so happened I was in the Libertarian Party, and they were saying, hey, if you want to be a paper candidate, we'd love to have you as a paper candidate. You don't have to run or anything, but the more names we have on the ballot makes the party look bigger, and it gives a perception to people that, the Libertarian Party is really doing something. And I said, sure, I'll be a paper candidate. That'll be a good way to get my toe in. And I said, on the odd chance that I win this, what do I don't have to swear to sign something? And they said, don't worry, you'll never win it. Because they knew the whole elections were rigged. I didn't realize it at that time. They said, don't worry, you'll never win it. And I said, well, but what am I supposed to sign or read or swear to? And they said, oh, you have to swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And I said, well, that's great. I'm gonna read that as my homework for being on this paper ballot thing. And I'm reading the Constitution, and the Constitution not making any heads or tails of sense to me. I'm like, what the hell? I said, I'm going to take a class in this Constitution thing. And you know, UT was available, but I had really started to get sick and tired of the university system. It is really not, if you want, you know, knowledge and wisdom, there are some aspects of it that are good, but there's really nothing there. And so I looked around and I'd heard about this guy named Michael Bednarik, who was a libertarian that taught a class called Introduction to the Constitution. That'd be great, I thought. It's a, you know, like a day-long class, or I think it's day-long class, yeah. But Michael would not accept Federal Reserve notes. And I forget what he charged. It was 5 or 10 ounces of silver. You had to go get 999 fine rounds of silver to pay him. He would not accept Federal Reserve notes. So I'm like, that's very interesting and kind of weird. So I bought some silver so I could take this class with Michael. And bless his heart, he's passed now. But boy, did he do one heck of a job in terms of waking me up to how the world really works, you know. And, you know, he talked all about, you know, first of all, how, you know, I don't think anything constitutional has been passed in forever. Ron Paul might be the one person who talks about the Constitution, how we used to be on common law, but then the United States, you know, either went bankrupt or was on the verge of bankruptcy, and we had to switch over to UCC law, and we did switch over to that, which is this whole smoke and mirrors. He went a lot into that, and of course the Kennedy assassination, which kind of everybody had heard that was something not whatever we were told, and you know, just all the stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, I had no idea. I had no idea about all of this. And then, you know, silver. And I started doing more research on silver. And back then there was a guy named Theodore Butler who was talking about silver. And I got to tell you, you know, I've always been interested in money. I grew up kind of poor, not too bad, but you know, we didn't have a lot of money, and a lot of kids that come from families like that get real interested in wealth, and I was no exception. So I wanted to know about money and studied a lot. And I remember prior to this, I had bought one of those. It was $97. You remember those? You got all the like 12 cassette tapes and a book, and it was a whole course on how to make money in the stock market. And I wanted to read that and learn that. I thought that would be also very interesting. The real estate was doing really well, but you know, I'm totally into this. So I buy that course, and it turns out, I'm reading the book, and it turns out the whole thing is just about how the markets are manipulated and how you can see the patterns of manipulation, and you know, how you can trade it because you can see what they're doing and you can anticipate the moves. And I was so upset. I normally never return a course back, but I boxed that thing up and mailed it back because, you know, the SEC isn't going to let something like that happen, right? And there's too many regulators and too many laws. Like, that's just illegal, and nobody could do. And after I take this course with Michael Bednarik, actually I loved it so much, I organized 4 more for him, and I took the whole thing like 5 times over and over again because he was such a dynamic speaker. He ran for, he was on the Libertarian ticket for President of the United States for I don't know which one of those years, 2004 or 2008 or something like that. But then after taking his class, I was like, where's that book? I need to get that book and those tapes because those people were right, you know, and I never could find that course again. So anyway, I began to study silver, and silver is absolutely and completely manipulated and controlled. And just over the years of being a silver investor, you know, I've seen so much happen. And, you know, so like I think it's 2003 or so, the U.S. government used to be the largest holder of silver. It had like 5 billion ounces of silver at one point in time. And the Treasury announced, was it 2000? It was early 2000s. They announced they were going to have to go out onto the open market to buy silver because they didn't have any more. So those 5 billion ounces were gone. And you could say, where did they go? Well, part of it is the price of silver has been kept low, and I'll get into how they do that in the mechanism here. But the price of silver has been kept low for so long that, you know, nobody wants to mine it because, you know, I mean, I don't even know what the price to mine an ounce of silver is. So, but it's, you know, certainly not worth it. In fact, right now, almost all the silver that's mined is a byproduct of them going after copper or some other stuff. So, there actually are no real silver mines in operation right now. And there are silver mines, and to get them up and running is going to take a couple of years. So, when the price of silver does reach its value, it gets freely traded. It's going to take years for there to be new supply coming on. Anyway, just a rough guideline. We use about 900 million ounces a year, or we used to, on the planet for different things like jewelry and photography and dental work and medical devices and, smartphones and stuff like that. I believe that number has gone up way up since then, because I was just looking like your average data center, and there's 11,000 data centers on the planet, uses up 250,000 ounces of 250,000 ounces of silver. Smart panels, solar panels all have some silver in it. And they claim that they can have other alternatives if silver wasn't available, but silver is just an extraordinary material. Like, it's got this reflect. Okay, so I had to switch cameras because I had that device. Anyway, Mercury's in retrograde, and I'll be glad when we get out of it. I never used to think that was such a big deal. Well, back when I was doing the real estate, I had an attorney who, and he said, he never handled any cases, any new cases, never started any new cases when Mercury was in retrograde, because they always seemed to go bad. So anyway, so onward, silver has so many uses. It's incredible. Like, super reflective, antibiotics. They use it in medical stuff all the time. We used to have filters for the pool that were made out of silver. It's highly, highly conductive. And theoretically, we've been using 1 billion ounces a year. I think it's actually a lot more. And if you check out some of the work with Bix Weir on Road to Ruta, he really digs into these numbers in incredible depth. And things like the Silver Institute just lies. They just lie. It's unbelievable. You watch Bix stuff, and there's a reason there's lying. And what they do is they're lying to show that there's not that much silver being used, right? And there's a reason for that. And that's the manipulation. Even the U.S. Mint's involved in it. The U.S. government's involved in it. I think everything on the planet is involved in it. And it's the Achilles heel for the entire banking system. So it's the smallest commodity that's traded on the COMEX. And it's really a crazy thing that the COMEX is pretty much the only place on earth where the price of silver is set. Right? They said in London, they actually call it the London fix. I'm like, yeah, you're right. But they pretty much just basically follow whatever the COMEX does. Now, that doesn't tell you there's something ripe for manipulation there. So you're like, wow, well, the price is low. Why is it low? Well, they actually make money suppressing the price, which to normal people doesn't make any sense. So let me give you a quick explanation without getting run over by this car. So there's a thing called let me go back to I'll get to short selling in a minute, but let me go back to production. So we only produce about 700 million ounces a year. So we theoretically use 1 billion ounces. We only use about 700 million. I think the uses is actually way more. I think it's more like 1.5 billion. And the 700 million comes some from mining, and then a whole bunch from recycling and that kind of thing. So this deficit of anywhere from 300 million to 700 million ounces year over year over year has been going on for decades. And that's why the U.S. Mint, who had 5 billion ounces in at the end of World War II, has no more ounces available anymore. It's they've used it all. So that's why when back in the early 2000s, we were like, oh my God, the Mint doesn't even have any more money. Surely the price is going to get loose now. And it didn't. There's so many times when we thought, oh my God, this is going to be it. And it hasn't. So this has been actually one of the most incredible financial dramas that you could ever imagine. So uses and suppression. Let's go into the suppress. So how does that work? So short selling is a concept that's a little bit hard to get your mind around. But here's a simple idea of, let's say I have a computer and I say, hey, do you want to buy a computer from me? And you say, yeah, I'm going to need one in about 6 months. I'm like, can you pay me for that computer now? And you're like, okay. So like, you give me a good computer always seems to cost about $1,000, right? If not more, but we'll do that. So we agree, this is going to have so many megabytes and so much speed and so much processing capability and whatever. And then in 6 months from now, we all know that the prices of computer go down and down and down. And I'm just using this as an example. So 6 months from, you give me the 1,000, 6 months from now, I buy another computer that's the same specs, but it only costs maybe $800 at that point in time because it's changing so much. And boom, so I buy you that one and give you the $800 computer, which you paid me $1,000 for before, and bam, I just made $200, right? Which is how short selling works. It actually makes sense. I think most of these types of contracts were originally used in agriculture, where a farmer would say, hey, I want to, I'm growing wheat or whatever, corn, and I need the money now. Maybe I can sell my crop ahead of time and get the money for it, or at least have a contract on it so I know what my profits are going to be, or I can lock it in if I think the price is going up or down. It was originally for agriculture to help and facilitate trade like that, which made a lot of sense. But now it's been so abused by all these financial guys and banksters and all that. So the bankers can have what's called naked shorts, which means they can sell silver on paper without even having any silver. So they can just enter into a contract and say, hey, we're going to sell, 1 million ounces of silver at this price, and they don't even have the 1 million ounces, they just have the paper. Now, you and I can't do naked shorting because we're real people. But if you were a bankster like JP Morgan, then you can do naked shorting. There's only a couple of the really, really large banks that are allowed to do naked shorting, and they do naked shorting. And so here's how it works. Like, say the price of silver is $25. They buy a bunch of the contracts. It goes up and up and up to 30. And then at some point in time, they sell all of it. And then what they do is they sell a whole bunch paper. They sell a whole bunch, and they drive the price down because they have so much ability to create these short contracts that they can drive the price down. And they'll drive it back down to like $25 again. And they made money on the way down. And then they release as much of their short contract as they can, or they just roll it over, and then they buy some. So it goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And they make money. In fact, JP Morgan, and if this doesn't stink to high heaven of fraud, has like a perfect trading, 100% perfect trading record for silver for I don't know how many years in a row, right? Nobody has a 100% perfect trading record. That's just not something we do. If you're a trader, you win and you lose, and hopefully your wins maximize. You don't have 100%. So JP Morgan has been the big one. AIG was in there, the insurance company was in there for a while, and then they got out. I guess it was a few years back. And Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank has been involved in that. Bank of America has been involved in that. Bix Weir, again, Road to Ruta, he's one of the best. There's a couple of other really good guys. Theodore Butler used to be amazing, but, as I said, he's passed on. So they're manipulating this, and the thing is they have these short contracts that are piling up and piling up and piling up, right? So they've created so much paper stuff that they somehow just roll them over. So apparently, like, I don't know what the ratio is exactly, but it's something like for every 1 ounce of silver that's real, there's 400 ounces of paper silver. And if you have short contracts, your losses are unlimited. So if you buy a stock in something, all you have to lose is if the stock price goes to zero, you just lose all of your money. But if you've shorted it, you're banking that the price goes down. For every dollar that the price goes up, you lose $1. And it's unlimited. If the price goes up $100, you lose $100. If the price goes up $1,000, you lose $1,000, right? Beyond, so shorting has unlimited losses, right? Because you got to pay for that ounce of silver later on. So I've seen a lot of different analysis over the year, and generally it's around like $35 an ounce. They can't let the price go much above $35 an ounce. And you'll look historically, they very rarely do that. It came close to $50, was it 2011 or so? And then they slammed it in the middle of the night at one of the Asian markets or something like that. Bam, back down again. So absolute manipulation and control. Now, the CFTC and all those guys, they're all in it. It's a rotating door thing. They used to be a vice president at, Bear Stearns or whatever, or the whole thing, right? Or JP Morgan, and then now they're a regulator, but then they're VP, the whole thing, right? And so they're totally in on it. Even the U.S. Mint. Now, see, the thing is, the way the world is connected now with these derivatives and all these, I'm sure you've heard about the multi-quadrillion derivatives situation that we have. And it's so tight that if one bank goes down, it'll take down the entire banking system. And not necessarily a real small bank, but even medium-sized banks. If we have one that goes down, it will destroy the entire banking system. And that would be a global financial collapse. So, and silver is a bank destroying. And then, like the five biggest banks in the world are heavily involved and have a huge short position. And they're really protecting that, and they have to protect that at any level, and all the governments do too, because they just go to, if they don't already own the governments, they just say, hey, if we aren't protected, then we're going to have a global financial collapse. And apparently, I think it was 2011, there actually was an attack on the banking system, not necessarily on silver, and they came within hours of the whole thing being collapsed, and then they got bailed. No, maybe it was 2008, and then they all got bailed out. The American public was completely livid, because why are you bailing out the banks when everybody else is going into foreclosure and right? You remember that whole Wall Street stuff, the Occupy Wall Street and all that. Anyway, they were saying, look, if we hadn't have done that, then the entire global financial system would have collapsed. So we've been on the verge before. And anyway, the silver is the Achilles heel of the banking system. Now, I hear people talking about, all any one country would have to do, like if the BRICS nations wanted to really destroy, the NATO alliance or the Western side, all they would have to do is just buy up a bunch of silver. Actually, anybody who has a significant amount of wealth, that's all they would have to do is buy up a bunch of silver. There's some wonderful stories about Warren Buffett had a bunch of silver, and then he got in trouble with something. I think General Re, his insurance company, and the way he got out of that deal is he ended up giving up his silver. I think there's rumors that he has bought a whole bunch more again. In the 70s, there were two guys named the Hunt brothers, and they didn't do anything illegal, although they ended up getting framed for it. And all they were doing was they were seeing what the bankers were doing, even back in the 70s, and they just wanted in on the game. They were just buying up silver, and they were going to see if they can push the price up, and bankers weren't going to have that, That's kind of like if you were going to try and sell drugs in a drug dealer's territory, you're going to get killed, or you're going to get run out. So that's basically what happened to the Hunt brothers. They never did anything illegal, except for that it wasn't illegal. It was just that they were trying to get in on a game that the bankers had, and they weren't going to share. There's so many stories about silver that are just absolutely fascinating. And the more you learn about them, the more you realize how the world really works. So anyway, if you had a bunch of money, anybody had a bunch of money, you could buy a bunch of silver, And Russia had talked a little while ago about adding silver as a part of its strategic reserve. Okay, here comes some noise. This road is really fun to drive. I'm going to make a video for you of driving this road. It's just like this wicked backcountry road with all these crazy, dangerous parts on it. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge to young Puerto Rican men, apparently. Anyway, where was I? So, yeah, I realized when the COVID rolled out, for me, that was the first time that we saw the global cabal flex its muscles, like we totally own this planet, and they totally dominated it. And you could tell that because every single country fell in line with that agenda, and it all rolled out exactly as they wanted it to. And there were a couple of smaller countries that tried to buck the trend, and then those leaders mysteriously died, right? You know. I saw a quote recently, the Rothschilds' net worth, 500 trillion. They own everything. They own the banks, they own the governments, they own the media, da-da-da-da-da. So that's why, if Russia or any large wealthy person wanted to buy a lot of silver to tank, to destroy the banking system, that's why they're not going to do it. Russia is a part of the whole, the Rothschilds own Russia, just like they own the United States. They own all the plantations. But we are running into this supply chain issue, right? So there's all this need for silver. There are all these, again, the data centers, the solar panels, the Tesla cars, the iPhones, everything uses a lot of silver. And actually most of the silver that we've used, because it's in small bits, it's all now in landfills all over the world. At some point in time, I don't know how, they'll probably figure out a way to reclaim them, but because it will get valuable. But we're really running into this supply crunch now. Like it's, so the LBMA, London Metals Bullion Association, something like that. Anyway, they were, and the COMEX were two big warehouses where you used to be able to buy physical silver and gold. And I'm not sure what the deal is on silver, but the LBMA earlier this year announced, now it used to be you pay your contract and you pick it up the next day, so T+1. You can get it in one day. And the London Bullion Exchange just recently announced, no, it's T+8 weeks, right? And everybody's saying that's the same as default. Yeah, I bought my metal and you're going to give it to me in 8 weeks. That means you don't have it, right? And so there's a lot of question about how much do they actually have and who has it. SLV for sure absolutely is run by JP Morgan, so that's completely corrupt. And there's probably no metals in that. I think the other is at the Sprott or something like that. People believe that that's legit, but boy, you really don't want to get mixed up in any of that Wall Street stuff. So you want to have it in your own hands. There's some other indications like, first of all, we need it for all kinds of stuff now, but other people like Cliff High and other people who are talking about these new technologies coming in, especially for zero point energy or some of these other computing abilities, they need silver and large amounts of it. So the need for silver is just going up and up and up and up. And the industrial demand for silver, I think, is finally going to destroy the manipulation control on the price of silver. Now there's another aspect to this I'd like to bring in, and that is, so we know, I have a master's degree in transpersonal psychology. I spent a lot of time studying Jung and archetypes and dreams, dream interpretation, symbolism. And so gold is the sun, silver is the moon, the gold is the masculine form of energy, and silver is the feminine. And it just makes total sense that the feminine has been manipulated and controlled for, actually, Bix talks about this for 175 years, that The Brits used to be the dominant world power, and silver was the primary money, the sterling. And they were starting trade with China, and they were sending so much silver over to China for the silks and the spices and all that stuff, and they were losing so much silver out of their treasury. So what they did is they started selling a whole bunch of opium to the Chinese, and they made it at a price. They had to pay in silver to buy it, and that's how they were getting their silver back. And the Chinese were not happy about that, and that's what ultimately the opium wars were all about. By the way, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank were big players in that whole experience. I mean, silver is just so amazing. But anyway, it is the feminine metal, and it's been manipulated and controlled, and yet it's the most useful metal. It really talks about, to me, it speaks to me about the feminine, and it really truly is the feminine. It's the people's money, right? People always had silver. They may not have been able to have gold, but they always had silver. For example, a grown man working a hard day's work, so we're talking about a soldier, or blacksmith, or somebody like that, they'd work for a full day for 1/10 of an ounce of silver. Like, silver was what the people had, and it was the people's money. So that it's been manipulated and controlled, and that it's a feminine force for so long. I will tell you, the experience in motherhood was, in a lot of ways, that was a really difficult journey for me, because I was deeply going into the feminine and offering all kinds of things to the family that were, there's a lot that women bring that were just completely the emphasis and focus on nutrition and health, or just all the cohesiveness that a woman brings, and how little that is appreciated. And part of me, the struggle was like, how do I reclaim it within myself? But it definitely was represented in the exterior, as it is in our culture. And so for me, that silver has been manipulated and controlled this whole time. I'm like, of course it has. It's the most useful, incredible. It has so much functionality. It's not only money, but it's used in all of these different industries. It's jewelry. It's all these different things, and it's cheap, right? It's the lowest price thing, and it's been manipulated down for all these, 2 centuries. And I'm like, yeah, women have been manipulated down for a lot longer than that, but that silver matches up with that story, makes perfect sense to me. So I'm very hopeful. I mean, we're shifting into the age of the Aquarius, right? We're shifting into a new time period, and that really is a real thing. I used to hear people talk about that and go, New Age bullshit, but it really is happening. There are really different energy shifts and going on, and I'm very hopeful, and I believe that silver will ultimately be valued, and it will actually be valued what it should be valued for, which is way more than gold. It's way more valuable than gold, and there's way less of it than gold. There's way more gold than they talk about. There's a movie called McKenna's Gold that talks a lot about this, and one of the reasons that you're not allowed to go into the Grand Canyon in the United States is because there are actually huge amounts of gold that are being stored there or kept there or whatever, but there's so little silver left now that's in a usable form, and there's so much more gold that the price of silver is not, people laugh at me when I say, no, it's going to be more valuable than gold. I'm like, it's going to be 10 times more valuable than gold. And I just can see it so clearly, because it's so useful and it's so scarce, and it's been manipulated for so long. We all used to talk about how horrible the world is going to be, because it seemed to us that the banks would have to collapse before silver would find its rightful value. But Since then, a lot of us have been thinking more on this, and the bankers are a pretty slippery bunch, and we're thinking, well, they'll probably find a way to declare force majeure on the COMEX. They'll find some way to get out of their, billions of dollars of contracts that they can't fulfill on. But even when they hey kitty, but you been out walking with me? Psst, psst, let's see if I can get you here. Meet you. Yeah, she's very talkative. She's a very talkative kitty. Michu is a common Puerto Rican nickname for just means cat. So I'm learning Spanish by naming my cats. Anyway, it's just such an incredible metal. So when my son asked me, why are you investing in this? Why are you holding on to this? So for me, it's way more than just an investment. It's not an investment. It's like, I know that having this silver, first of all, is just a tiny stance of like, the bankers don't have this, I've got this, and it's not much, but I've got it, right? And the other is, this is truly an incredibly valuable and incredible material, and it represents, femininity, it represents the moon, it represents the suppression of the female aspect for so long. And to me, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I'm holding that because I know that's valuable. I know that's valuable. And other people, if they can disregard it and they say, well, that's not, there's always been $35, it's never going to go up, or it's been that way for years. Like, yeah, you guys can say that if you want, but I know what's valuable. The other aspect is I think at some point here very soon, I'll be continuing to teach a little bit more on backyard food production. I think I'm going to be shifting. I think I'll be released from that agreement with the universe, and I'll be shifting into other things. And if you remember, my first degree is in electrical engineering, and I'm very, very interested in zero-point energy. Been doing a lot with biogeometry, and which deals a lot with torus fields and energetics, and been doing a lot with, just in my personal time, on other structures for how the universe and energy and electricity works. And I really want to delve into that in the future. And my understanding is I'm going to need, I'll need lots of materials, but I'm going to definitely need silver. So probably be keeping it for some of my own experiments. All right, well, so silver has meant so much more to me, and it's been a wild ride. It's been just such a wild ride. There's so many, I don't know, you remember when the Wall Street bets people, or the silver squeeze people were talking, it was a couple of years ago, and they were like, a lot of people started to figure out that, like, hey, maybe we could squeeze the banks, and a bunch of people were buying silver. And it turns out that the retail side at that time was not enough to make a difference. It's the industrial demand now that's really, really, really starting to drain they're draining the warehouses. I don't know how much is left. Nobody knows, but there's not much. And actually this silver squeeze that's coming up on Monday, will it be enough? I don't know, but it might. I mean, enough people buy more silver. It's just taking it off the table from the bankers or from the industrial users. I wonder if this is Jose. So, it is Jose. That's why I invest in silver. And I don't know if I totally communicated that to my son or not. I don't think he totally got it, because I think he's still listening to his dad. But time will tell. He says, you should sell that, Mom, put it in something else. I'm like, no, I'm not going to. This has too much meaning for me on too many other levels, and I know what's right, and I know what's valuable. So anyway, I hope I've inspired you or encouraged you. If you don't have any silver, if you don't have any money to buy silver, like I said, go buy penny. You know, go to the bank and get pennies. Right? It costs them 3.4 cents to make a penny now, and go get nickels. It costs them 15 cents to make a nickel. Right? A friend of mine, we were at a smoothie shop, and we bought smoothies, and you know, I put one of those dollar bills in the thing, and I keep my change. You know, you know, I don't want to, you know, I don't want to. You know, that stuff's valuable. The change is valuable. Those paper bills, they're about to evaporate. Okay. Well, this is Marjorie. I really want you to be prepared and be equipped. And this is it's actually like a once in a multi-generational opportunity because it's been suppressed for so long. And when it goes up, it really will. I mean, silver will actually be 10 times more valuable than gold. So on Monday, I had a guy reach out to me. His name is Toby, who's also as passionate as I am about silver and has done a lot more on this. I'm going to have a written post for you. If you're watching this on YouTube or Brighteon or Rumble or BitChute or any of the gazillion places where I post, head over to my Substack channel. And that's where the full written report is. And then there's also a lot more videos and content that I get out on the Substack channel than I'm able to get on these other venues. So yeah, I don't know what it is. Substack, MarjoryWildcraft.com, something like that. But regardless of how you do it, please go buy some silver, find some silver, get it in your hands, because once this thing gets loose, it's going to become what we call unobtainium. All right. Talk to you later. This is Marjorie. Have a great week.